Awesome. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Business. Today I'm joined by the lovely Claire, founder of Integrated Resources, a HR consultancy that really just fixes things, doesn't just advise, but actually builds and implements solutions that work. And from our little pre-podcast, Claire's got a very good way to read somebody very quickly and understand people, which I think translates into her work very well on how to make systems run smoothly and more effectively. But Claire, I'll let you take away and give probably a much better intro of yourself.
Well, I'll add to what you said. We always describe ourselves as removing the people headaches. That doesn't mean to say removing the people. It means removing the headaches and keeping the best of the people and the best elements of the people. And the other strapline we had early on was blue chip quality freelance fees. So I was sitting the other side of the desk. I was an HR director across the globe. I'm a linguist by training. And I sort of became a modern linguist by inclination. And I found that when I was an HR director, I could pay a lot of money, several thousands a day, to buy in help when we needed extra resource or extra specialism. And I never found it was as good as I needed it to be. So I thought there was a gap in the HR world to provide spot-on HR consultancy at decent prices that were affordable, fix the headaches, release potential, and I've got lots of bees in my bonnet. One of them is about releasing potential. Why do people get stuck? Why do individuals get stuck? Why do organizations get stuck? Why can't they grow? Is it choice that they've decided to go for some lifestyle decision and keep a business running at its current size? Does it want to grow? Does it want to go public? What difficulties does it get into? How do you stop people wasting time with disputes? So dispute resolution is very important. Lawyers are charging a very high hourly rate for the legal side. And we are absolutely up to speed with employment law, so we can fix things on that side. And we can deal with the soft side, so leadership development, training, skills development, releasing potential. And you can release potential using law and compliance and governance. You can also release potential by training and coaching. And some years ago, probably 20, 30 years ago, I got into psychometric profiling. And I found it gave me a language for discussing behavior. And that led me into, we've done quite a lot of work on competency frameworks. You can't discuss behavior and what isn't going well if you don't have a language. Without a competency framework, you can't join together recruitment with performance management. So this work has allowed me to bring together my inclination towards languages, communication. And I always say, if everybody communicated perfectly, we wouldn't have a job. So that's fundamental.
Interesting.
So communication and time management, those are my big hot buttons.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a passion about the human brain, about why we behave, certain language and communication, and that's kind of applied perfectly into the business that you've launched. And I'm assuming giving you the results that you've produced for clients because there's a passion behind it.
I've been very happy being part of this business. And at the beginning, it was just me till I suddenly thought, why am I working 12-hour days when I've done this in order to have some flexibility? And I had, at that point, children of sort of 2 and 22. So, 2 and 12. So I wanted more flexibility. And you can't have 100% flexibility and 100% freedom and 100% security. You make a balance between freedom and security. And I think that divides the entrepreneur from the non-entrepreneur. The entrepreneur will take the risk and go for the freedom. And over time, the security develops. I think that also got me into why people make the decisions across transitions. And I became very interested in psychoanalysis and why people do what they do and how they're driven by their unconscious. And I got into Lacanian psychoanalysis after the French psychoanalyst Lacan, after Freud. And I was fascinated by why people sabotage themselves. And they sabotage themselves in all sorts of ways, like the alcoholic will drink, the drug addict will use drugs. and how you stop sabotaging on rather less serious aspects, but very important behavioural aspects. And that leads into time management. Why do people waste time? And 2 years ago, I read Oliver Burkeman's amazing book, 4,000 Weeks. And if you haven't read it, I recommend it to everybody I meet. And it's a wonderful book. And I always say, I wish I'd read it 30 years ago, but he didn't write it 30 years ago. That I think is very important. It's about deciding what you really want out of life and doing it. But people find it very hard to access their desire. And I thought of training to be a psychoanalyst, but in the event I thought I would train as a coach instead. Not a decision I've regretted. So that's sort of my fundamental philosophy.
That's really interesting. I like that. I like that because it stems into one of my personal philosophies as well, is that businesses are run by people. For example, like a sales department within a business, right? If the sales department isn't performing, what are the sales reps doing when they get home? What are they doing in the morning, right? Are they actually taking care of the core principles for themselves first before it comes into the business? And, if you're doing everything for yourself and you're happy internally, then externally the same results will represent.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think the quicker you can work out somebody's values, and in turn that drives their thoughts, their feelings, their beliefs, which in turn drive their behaviours. Instead of just looking at their behaviours, think, why are they behaving like that? And I think it all boils down to value. So when you're recruiting, you should be looking at what the motivators are and what the values are to understand the behaviours. So my team tend to be very outcome focused, very detail orientated. That's what I need in terms of HR delivery. Some of them are very, very creative. They tend to be on the training and leadership side. I'm very outcome focused and very creative. But if we had a room full of me, there'd be so much energy bouncing around, nothing would happen. By the same token, if I had a room full of Cambridge mathematicians who play bridge, they will be very strong evaluators, but nothing will ever happen because they'll be sitting there evaluating everything. So you need a combination of people to make a perfect team out of imperfect people. And that brought me to psychometrics and to think about how you describe traits and how you use language, and therefore how you can get complementarity in an organisation, and therefore people who solve all aspects of problem-solving cycle. So, for example, every day you have to eat lunch. You make a decision and you go through a problem-solving cycle all day. Simple things, difficult things. Right, lunch. Right, 2 o'clock. Gosh, no wonder I'm hungry. I better go and eat. What am I going to eat? Oh, I fancy burger and chips. I know that's not really very good for me, and I am trying to lose weight. I'm not going to have burger and chips. I fancy a prawn sandwich on whole wheat. There isn't any. So you've done a quick evaluation, so you need to go shopping. So in the end, you settle for an omelette with a bit of bacon. Right, okay, I can do that. That's in the fridge. I'm going to do it. So you go through a series of problem-solving steps. What are the options? Evaluate the options, make a decision, implement. And you should later evaluate again and say, actually, I need to go shopping because I haven't got enough in the fridge. So that different people bring different strengths, and I think understanding that as well, understanding the people you're recruiting, why you've recruited them, and utilising from their strengths. And there may be things about them that drive you up the wall. So there's somebody in the team who's incredibly obsessional and incredibly detail orientated, but for certain things they're absolutely brilliant. So it's a matter of horses for courses.
Yeah, it's similar to like a football team, right? You can't have a team full of strikers. You need defenders. You need midfielders. You need a goalkeeper for the unit to work efficiently.
Yeah. But if you have somebody in a team of footballers or hockey players, they need to understand their roles, don't they? And they need to understand the role of the wing is different from the centre forward and so forth. So they need to understand their roles, but they also need to be likeable. If you get a cuckoo in the nest, it disrupt the whole team. So when do you need teamsmanship? When don't you? So the soft skills as well as the technical skills. are very important,
Yeah.
just as important. The soft and
It
hard.
needs to be a well-oiled machine to deliver and execute the way that you want to execute, essentially, and that's the biggest thing. And in your experience, because I'm sure you've hired people, and I'm sure based on your knowledge about the mind, you've helped people get out of their own way because you've seen potential. You can see, okay, this person could be amazing, right? But they may be drinking too much. They may be, don't sleep enough, or they're not taking care of themselves in some way. Have you had an experience like that before?
Yeah, I've definitely had those experiences, but I've seen it more through coaching. So
Okay.
somebody presents with a problem, I'm not getting this next job, and then you eventually work out they don't know what they want, and you help them work out first what they want and then how to get it. Or we've only got three things we can play with in our lives. We've only got what we eat and drink, how much we sleep, and how much exercise we get. That sort of makes us physically and mentally fit. And sometimes I discover something in the course of coaching, and I discover they don't sleep enough. And then I recommend Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. I understand they don't actually know what they want, and we go through a vast number of exercises helping them to work out what they want, because human beings often don't know what they want. And then they'll sabotage. So they'll be very, very overweight, and that comes from the head, not the mouth. So why is somebody doing what they're doing? Coaching touches on psychotherapy, but it isn't the same thing. But I think being psychotherapeutically, psychoanalytically aware does make for better coaching. So I see it through recruitment, through coaching more than recruitment. But in recruitment, I see a lot of clients, they think they know how to recruit, but they don't. They don't even know how to ask the right questions to elicit the information around certain competences.
Makes perfect sense. Make perfect because the right questions get the right answer. Very similar to what we said earlier. It's like sales, right? Why is it there's two sales reps? Why is it one makes loads of money and one makes doesn't? Because they're not asking the right questions.
Well, you're looking for evidence. So if you want to predict future behaviour, you haven't got a crystal ball. You have to use competency-based interviewing. So you have to say, tell me about a time when you have. And you start teasing out the behaviours and see, well, if they've done it before, they can do it again.
That's interesting. And then, like, what type of question from your experience have that? I guess if you had to ask one question that could help you uncover as many, let's say, limiting beliefs, let's say, bad habits, what do you think that question is?
I would probably use a detailed Jungian-based psychometric profiling tool like Lumina Spark, and I would talk to them about their traits, and I would say, tell me about the trait that you found most useful in the workplace. And what about the flip side of that trait? When has it got in the way? When you've used too much of it? When has that stood in your way? And I would therefore tease out of them what behaviours they then exhibit frequently.
And then once you discover those behaviors, what's your next steps after that?
Well, I would hope that we'd already got a very detailed job specification, and so I'd be matching. So it's about knowing self, knowing the job, matching the two. So it's all about gathering evidence against each of the competencies you're looking for, and then doing a decent match and being impartial. I don't know whether you've ever done any of these Harvard questionnaires on unconscious bias. You've got to be aware of that, because we have an Equality Act in 2010 which has 9 protected characteristics in it, so we've got to be careful from a legal point of view. But from a human point of view, you don't want to bring your own bias in. You don't want to recruit a room full of you, because you don't want a room full of you. You want problem solvers right across the problem-solving cycle.
It's impressive. I'm really interested in what you do, and I love the human brain, as you understand. I want to know more about your brain and really nitpick it. What point? Because I speak to a lot of people, and a common trend that I've seen is specifically from entrepreneurs and founders that there's a lady called Geeta. The podcast is going live. It's already live actually, and she talks about putting flags into the ground and going hell no, right? And it's about that analogy or the metaphor in a sense that okay, this is not what I wanted to do. This is now what I want to go into, right? Did you have a moment like that where you transitioned into the business and thought, okay, this is the way forward?
I had a moment when I was 21 And I woke up one morning, I was undergraduate in Cambridge, and I woke up and the snow was on the ground. It was April. It was very late. And I thought, why is the room so light? And I had red curtains and it was so light because there was snow on the ground. I woke up and it wasn't the snow that caused this. And I suddenly thought, what rules? Whose rules? And my mother used to wave a finger and say, you know the rules. I never quite knew which rules she was talking about, but she would say, you know the rules. And I thought back on my life, and I thought how at school people always said I was very quiet and I needed to speak up more and I ought to ask more questions and Claire ought to participate more. And then I remember being told I was terribly cooperative. And I suddenly thought, I'm not this person. I'm an outgoing, go-getting, positive-minded, in a good sense, aggressive individual. This is bollocks. And so I literally sort of grew into myself overnight. It was very odd.
Wow.
But I was talking to my son the other day, my youngest son, who's 30, and we were discussing strengths in relation to a particular role we were recruiting for a client. And I said to him, and we've talked about this a lot, you have to be clever enough. I know I'm clever, but it isn't that's got me on. What gets me on is my resilience, my stamina, my tenacity, and above all, my self-discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you don't have to be a genius. You have to be clever enough to use your strengths, and you have to be open-minded. And I think positivity is very important. I will always try and look on the bright side.
Definitely. There's a book. It's called The Power of Positive Thinking. Have you read that one?
I haven't read that.
Yeah, by Norman Peeville or something like that, I believe. But yeah, it's an incredible book, and that's all it really is, because it's like what Elle Nightingale says as well. Like, you are your thoughts. You are what you think, right? And if you're thinking about the bad, then you're going to have the bad. If you're thinking about the good, you're having the good. But I think it's super interesting that you, in a sense, had like an awakening of,
I did have an awakening.
Who you really are and the road that you want to go down. And I guess from what you were 21, going forward down that journey, do you think the perception of yourself has changed in any way?
Yes, definitely. I'm much more confident than I was at 21.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say I wouldn't wind the clock back unless I could take my wisdom with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one grows better at recognising boundaries. I don't let people step over my boundaries, nor do I encroach on theirs. And you've got to be aware of those boundaries. I did 8 years of psychoanalysis, which I found incredibly interesting, and I utilise that every day. And I'm able to put my point of view across more assertively than I could have at 21. Mm-hmm. And I'm willing to, without being aggressive, but just putting my boundaries down and saying, no, this is my view. And I suppose that stems from that moment, funny transition moment at 21, when I thought, whose rules, what rules? Actually, I'm free to be who I am, not who I'm told I am.
It's crazy that your mum always used to say that before, because it's almost like she was planting that seed, waiting for it to blossom.
Yes, and actually it had the opposite effect, I think.
Mm-hmm. But now you are where you are, and you've done incredible.
Yeah. The other thing is, I came from a very interesting background, but I did grow up in a vicarage for 11 years of my life.
Okay.
And there were always people coming in and out. And I had to learn to keep a secret from a very young age, because I used to overhear conversations that, could not be repeated. And so I was bound to end up doing something with people and the way they think. Yes. I didn't always agree with my parents, because I didn't always agree with them, but yeah.
And that essentially planted the seeds of liking to understand the brain and kind of balance it.
I like to understand why people behave as they do. And of course, sometimes it isn't apparent why they do what they do. But I think talking to my friends who are psychoanalysts, it all sort of feeds together, and I get it a lot more. Yeah.
Where do you get more insights about a person from, like psychometrics, like human behavior, or in terms of like their frameworks, like just how they operate, like when you're actually working with clients?
I really try to watch and listen a lot,
Okay.
get them to talk, get to know them, because the clues are there. You can see what their hot buttons are fairly quickly if you're really listening and watching. And then you're bound to suggest ways of solving problems that are going to be more attuned to them. Because there's not one way to solve a problem. Yes, from a legal point of view, there are certain things you need to put in a contract or a settlement agreement, and we do all that. And we do a lot of employment law, but using employment law flexibly but sensitively, doing the right things at the right time doesn't mean you're breaking the law. It means you're using the law and you're using it wisely.
Interesting. Interesting you mentioned that. I'm just making a note of that because I imagine because there's obviously the law, right, and then there's the way that sometimes the way people feel, and like a lot of the time, apparently sometimes they don't line up, right. So I'm sure you
Well, I
face
think
some
they do,
tension
you
with
see.
what feels right compared to what's right for the business demands.
Well, I think you have to recognise you're dealing with human beings, not robots. So you have an employment contract, and it has, load might be 4 or 5 pages long, loads of terms in it, lots of data protection, holidays, pay. I'm giving you my labour in exchange for pay is the basic fundamental of an employment contract. But what really matters is the psychological contract. Why am I here? What is it I really want out of this job and the workplace? Am I happy? Is it supporting my values? If there is a lack of congruence between my personal values and the organisational values, and I don't like the way other people are being treated, I'm not going to stay. So I think wherever there is law and there are technical competences, i.e. in that case, employment law, there are also soft competences about getting inside the head of the person and making sure you deliver the psychological contract. Whereas people just think contract of employment, read it, stick it in a drawer. Actually, it's quite important to read it because there are things in there that will come back later to bite you, or not bite you, but reward you. But you've also got to understand the psychological contract. And if you don't do that, the employment contract's a waste of time, because what really engages people is the psychology
Yeah.
behind it, not the contract.
Yeah, because part of my French, like apart from the salary, no one really cares too much about what's in the contract, right? Because it's usually
No, but
just,
they
just
ought
just
to.
legal jargon, right? Just that goes through it. And I
But
haven't.
you see, that's another thing. It's not good to write in legal jargon. We write in pure English prose, and what we say is what we mean, and it's not written in legalese. And I notice that when I'm looking at contracts and I'm reviewing templates. My team did more of that than me now because I tend to do the coaching side. But you can see where it's been drafted by a lawyer and where it's been drafted more thinking about the psychological contract, the brand of the organisation. So you have a very different contract in, say, music industry from the tone of the contract that might be building services. I mean, it depends.
It's interesting. I've never looked at or thought of the aspect of a psychological contract. Like, why are you here? Like, you being in this role. Like, what does it do for you? Does it get you closer to the Z goal that you're going for? Right, you're at A now.
Yeah,
Does it get you closer
and
to Z?
well, listening to your life story, it's very important. It's more important than what was written down. That's what kept you and drove you away.
Yeah, yeah. I would completely agree. And I think a lot of the time, everyone has a purpose, right? I spoke to this guy called Andrew, and he has a company called Neuro Ninjas, right, where it's like kind of like psychological as well, and it's about having purpose is the biggest thing, right? And a lot of people that, from my experience, are in the corporate world or a 9 to 5, whatever the job is, right? They are in it, but they don't have a purpose to be there.
Well, I've just read a very nice book called Ikigai. Have you read that?
No, no. Please share.
Ikigai, and it's
Is
the
he
subtitle.
Japanese?
Yeah, subtitle is The Japanese Way to Success and Happiness, something like that.
Okay.
And the first part of it is about you have to have a purpose. Yes, so different people have different purposes. Sometimes they have one purpose, sometimes they have more purposes. So one of my purposes is to play the piano and communicate through the piano, but it boils down to communication. So all my work is about communicating.
Yeah. And like you said before we jumped on, if people communicated perfectly, you wouldn't be in business.
No, because there would be no problem solved. Because at the bottom of I was having a debate with a friend, actually a Kiwi, who was going back to New Zealand for a period and coming back to the UK. I went to have a cup of tea with him before he went, and I think I gave him 4,000 weeks before he went, but I gave him a book, and I think it was that. I made this good comment, everything boils down to poor communications, and if people communicated, wouldn't have any problems. And he said, that's not the case domestically. I said, of course it is. I said, what about abuse? He said, well, that's not about communication. I said, of course it is. It's where a communication's broken down. And the communication becomes abusive because it isn't good communication.
Yeah.
So eventually I won him round to my view. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything boils down to communication, like the entire world. And like what I've noticed personally is like people aren't that good at communicating. I think for more when it comes to the business aspect, like numbers, logistics, they're great at that, right? But when it comes down to going past layers, right, going more internal, going inwards, people aren't that good at communicating it. And it could be identity, it could be that people don't want to be perceived the way that they actually are, right? But I guess for you, knowing that that's how people operate. Are you still there? Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Knowing that that's how people operate, that they're scared to go inwards and they're scared to, I guess, be more authentic within themselves.
Well, you just used that word, which is one of my favourite words, authentic. I think authenticity, why don't people communicate well? Sometimes they don't have the equipment. Okay, so then you can help them develop those. Sometimes they don't want to communicate. They're getting off on something that isn't so good. Sometimes authenticity is very hard for people. So I think that word is very important. There's a lovely bit from one of J.K. Rowling's Strike novels, and she writes, "Cowardice masquerading as compassion." It's one of my favourite quotes because in the workplace, people will not confront difficult issues. So they grow and they grow and they grow and they get worse and worse and worse. And you end up with a grievance. And we're already dead in the water at that point. Because if you have a grievance, you have a winner and a loser.
We also have a backlog. I think I spoke to a guy, it's like 70 million or something grievance cases.
Yeah, and it's a waste of time. So you have to actually communicate in a way that prevents the grievance and do mediation. You can use psychometrics to build teams and improve communication. But this cowardice masquerading as compassion quote from J.K. Rowling, people don't confront difficult things and they say, oh, I couldn't do that because that wouldn't be nice. They're kidding themselves. They're frightened. So robust, authentic, brave communication is very important.
And I guess for people watching this, because I personally struggle with authenticity as well sometimes, it's a lot easier said than done. And I guess what would you give to people an advice that allows someone to be more authentic within themselves? I guess give somebody that confidence that if they're not being who they truly are, and I feel like there may be somebody else, how do you feel like they could be more themselves?
I think you have to help people understand themselves. Plato used to write through the Socrates, know thyself. So help them get to understand themselves and how their communication lands. It doesn't always land how they're intending it should, and how somebody who's different from them can take from the communication completely something different from what they intended. So how communication lands. So psychometrics are very useful because you can actually show people why things might be going wrong.
No, I really love that. And Clara, our spot's coming up to an end. Usually I ask a question from you. I ask a question for you about tips or anything like that. But I think maybe because you have such a great understanding about the mind, maybe do you have a question that you want to ask me that I could answer that might be useful to some people?
Well, because you're much younger than me and you've arrived at the point you've arrived at, I would ask you the same question. What single trait do you look back on now that's been most helpful to you?
I don't know if this counts as a trait, but I would probably say obsession.
Right, okay. Now, obsessionality can be very, very enabling. It can give you terrific drive, but it can also paralyze you. So I have a friend who locks the car with a central locking and then checks every door. Guess what? He's very obsessional. So in his case, his obsessionality paralyzes him. But I had somebody on the team who actually hides her obsessionality. And she said, I'm very obsessional. So she will drive to get the best standard, but she knows she's got a limited time. So it doesn't paralyze her. So obsessionality can be very good and very unhelpful as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been on both ends of the sticks, and to be honest, it's probably one of the biggest battles that I battle daily, weekly, monthly, because I like to push the barriers and see how far I can push myself, and then I keep on going, and then I will just crash.
Yeah, but you've also got to get enough sleep, eat the right food, and get enough exercise. And eventually the penny drops that you are not immortal. And that's the wonderful thing about youth. You think you're immortal. And then you have a health scare. The son of a friend of mine last week had open heart surgery. He's 30. He's had a hell of a fright.
Wow.
And he's fine. But, until something happens, or happens to somebody you're close to, you feel immortal, and you have to recognise you've got limits.
Yeah, that's something that I'm still working on, still learning on, but practice makes perfect, as they say.
We're all still learning. We're not the finished product ever.
Exactly. Yeah, I saw that recently. How somebody talks about that life is a game, right? But it isn't a game, because games are made to be completed. You can't complete life.
No, well, you read Oliver Burkeman talking about time and how we can't control time, and life is time. Yeah.
Time. Well, Claire, thank you very much for jumping on today. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and you've
Very
given
good
some
to
awesome
talk to you.
insights.
Okay, thank you. Bye.